right. Those words and places are fun, aren't they? I'll tell you what. I thank goodness for English because we've changed words to make it sound easier. But them ancient cities, man, they were tough. So we switched things to like Esteban. It's way easier to say, but people still get that wrong. But good job. Thank you. So we are in our last part of our wilderness series, part 4. And we'll be spending our time in camping out in Luke chapter 10. Towards the end, the parable of the Good Samaritan. So if you have a Bible, open it to Luke 10 at the bottom, to verse 30 to 37, because there might be something you want to highlight, underline, spend time in. It's good to have it in front of you. If you don't have a Bible, you have a phone. And if you have a phone, there's probably a thing called the Bible app. So you could use that. You can highlight and do that stuff too. It's good to have God's Word in front of us, not just right here. And so if you would do that, that'd be great. This is the Good Samaritan story, is where we're going to spend time in today. Jesus told this story after being asked the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And God said, he is God. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So then he goes, well, who is my neighbor? So that's the setting of where this story comes into play. But the Good Samaritan story is a story that's pretty well known by most people who have ever read their Bibles because it's one that we talk about all the time. Problem is, today we don't realize that this story was told through wilderness. It's a wilderness story, not just a Good Samaritan story, and it required dangerous travel. So I have 2 pictures I want to show you to kind of set the stage and the scene of this story in the wilderness. The first one is just a smaller picture, but you can see how narrow that road is. Right, Helen? It's narrow. And it looks pretty dangerous. There's cliffs on one side, there's mountains on the other. We don't have that in Saskatchewan, but we do have the potholes. Right? We do have the mess of the roads. But it's a very narrow road, and the next picture will show it again. There's some people on it, but you can see how dangerous this travel would be. It was from Jerusalem to Jericho, and that's the only road from Jerusalem to Jericho. This is the desert, the mountainous desert. This is the only road that exists. So that's the one you have to take. And so that's where this story comes into play, on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. And so I pray, we're going to leave this picture up because I really want this to soak into us today of this story when we go through it. Because I want, as we unpack and experience this story as a wilderness story, not just a good story, I pray that it impacts us when we have our own wilderness journeys and when we see someone else experiencing their wilderness journey. I pray that this teaches us what it means to actually love our neighbor and not just say we do, and how it is actually even possible to love our neighbor, our other people, in our self-focused society of today. I mean, our society today is self-focused. And so I pray that this text will speak to us today, this Good Samaritan story. So Jesus told this story. He told this story in order to help answer the question, who is my neighbor? But also, in a deeper way, what we'll get to later is what that actually means in the context of life. But in order for us to understand the scope of this story, we need to understand the fact that there was social tension within it, and not just some random names like Samaritan and priest and Levite, that there's actually tension that existed, and that'll help us to appreciate the extravagant and extreme inconvenient love that existed in this story. So you have a Samaritan person and a Jewish person. Now, Jews and Samaritans hated each other with a passion. They didn't care if they died or not. They did not think either side was the true worshipers of God, of Yahweh, of the Lord Almighty, and so they hated each other. They thought they were each chosen. And so Samaritans believed that their worship, which was based on the Samaritan Pentateuch, the first 5 books of our Old Testament, that was their Bible. They believed that that was the true religion of the ancient Israelites before the Babylon captivity. So before Babylon, you had the north and the southern kingdom, and they all had gotten taken away by Assyrians and then eventually Babylon. They got exiled, but not everyone was exiled. Some were left. And so the Samaritans thought that they had the true religion of God because they didn't leave Jerusalem. And so those coming back, the Israelites, they became, like they had Judaism as a religion. And so they saw that as an altered, amended religion that was brought back from being intertwined with Babylon. So you can see there's tension. These people hated each other. You can feel it. And so it's going to get even stronger as we deal with a wilderness story and a path that is not very big. And so we get the question, who is my neighbor? And Jesus found the perfect opportunity to share something so extreme that he tells this story. But there's another question in this story. It's not just who is my neighbor, how do I love them? How do I love my neighbor? How can I love someone when they are in a wilderness story that I don't, or an experience that I don't want to deal with? Or how can I love somebody with whom I have tensions with? And maybe even hatred. So today, as you hear this text, hear them in the context of this wilderness road, this dangerous wilderness road, and the tensions that exist between each party. Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 30. And Jesus replied to the man who asked, "Who is my neighbor?" A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and when he was attacked by robbers. And they stripped him of his clothes, and they beat him. And then they went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And so to a Levite he came, and when he came to that same place, he saw him, he passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, he came to where this man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He had compassion on him. And he went to him and he bandaged his wounds. He poured oil and wine on his head. Then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn to take care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii, 2 things of money, and said, "I will reimburse you." And he gave it to the innkeeper and says, "Look after him, please." And he said, "When I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Then Jesus goes on to say, after telling the story, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" And the expert in the law that asked the original question responded, "The one who had mercy on him." So then Jesus' only response from that, "Go and do likewise." Bandits and robbers. We do have that still today. But there's these robbers that come, and this is a road where, you are susceptible to anything. So if I was a robber, I guess this is where I would beat the snot out of you and steal all your stuff, because you're going to travel with it because you're traveling on a road. That's very dangerous. And so they beat this Jewish man. And they not only beat him, they robbed him. They stripped him naked, humiliation. And then they left him for dead on the side of the road. So I want you to imagine today there's a man or woman, we'll go with woman too. There's someone laying on the side of the road on Highway 47. Stripped, beaten, bloody, bruised, left dead. What do? Do you stop? Would you stop? Well, the first person in this story, he didn't stop. First person on scene after this event of a beating and robbery is a Jewish man. Not only just a Jewish man, a priest. Mr. Holier Than Thou. And he's walking and he sees this man on the side of the road, a fellow Jew, a brother. And he sees him and goes, "Meh," and he goes through to the other side. He goes around him. Think about that a minute. You see the road. You're not very far away from him to go around him, right? And so he's literally having to lean to get around him and balance between the cliff and the man that's bleeding. steps around him so he can continue on his journey and get to where he wants to go without any interruptions. Next traveler is a Levite man from the Levite tribe, but he's still yet a Jewish man. And his Jewish brother's on the ground, dying. What does he do? I mean, there's cliffs on either side, danger at every turn. He does the same thing as the priest. He sees him and sneaks around. You know, I should use this. Sneaks around to the other side. Sneaks around to the other side. Continues on his journey so he can get to Jericho, so he can get to where he wants to go without having any interruptions. Now, this road is narrow, very narrow. It's got a big drop-off. You got dangers of everything. But it actually takes a very good amount of effort, to literally pass by somebody laying on the road or in the ditch, cliff, on a rock. It takes a lot of effort just to pass by on the other side. You would actually need some intentionality to do that, to act like you don't see him, to act like you can't hear. I mean, maybe if you took your hearing aids out, but to act like you can't hear him crying out in agony for help because he knows he's going to die and he has no other way of being saved. It takes a good amount of effort to physically move across the narrow road and get as far away as you can from the danger, from the inconvenience. You know what I call that? Loveless action. A loveless action, because it takes a lot of effort. At the same time, though, as a person traveling on this road, you wouldn't expect to see anybody else. I mean, it's not like the highways we have today where you have psh, 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 psh. It takes a lot of effort and travel time to do this, so you wouldn't have a lot of travelers. So you wouldn't think, if you were a priest or a Levite, you wouldn't think you would run across anybody else. And so when you do, you think that's the only one. And so you can sneak by on the other side knowing that more than likely nobody will see you leaving him there to die. It can be an anonymous act. It becomes this loveless action, but an anonymous one where only you and God know you did it. No one would notice. So then we have the last guy to come on the scene is a Samaritan. I mean, it's like an Estevanite. You call yourselves Estevanites? Estevanian? How do you say it, Helen? You don't know. Well, you're a bean Fadian. An Estevanian and a Weyburnian. Right? Weyburn and Estevan obviously don't get along when it comes to like hockey and different things like that. So we'll just go with that. Do you guys like Weyburn? Yeah? Oh. Okay, so it's like Russia and Ukraine. Okay? How many Ukrainians do we have? That's too bad. We only have one. We're not diverse enough at the second service. Okay, whatever. Anyway, you have a Samaritan who hates Jewish people. You have a Jewish person who hates Samaritans. Two things happen here. Number one, no one expects the Samaritan to stop to help the Jew, and that Jewish man does not expect the Samaritan to stop to help him because they hate each other. There's a division between them. And so all signs would point that this guy would literally come, there's the Jewish man, and he looks like he's in a world of hurt. And he would keep going. That's all signs would point to that. I mean, why would he help somebody who wants him dead? Where differences of opinions exist. But he stops. He does exactly the opposite of what you would expect. He stops. And he has compassion. It says he takes pity. Yes, he probably did take pity. He hates the man. But in that pity is compassion. And he has compassion on the man. He sees that this man is going to die, and there is no way without external help that he'll survive. The only way he'll survive is with external help. And so he stops, and he cares for him. He went to him, and he bandaged his wounds. which were probably many. And then he poured oil and wine. That's a way of disinfecting that. You can say he put antibiotics on him. And then he what? He put this man on a donkey, his own donkey, and brought him to an inn to take care of him. These inns existed because this road had so much danger that at some point, if you weren't going to make it before nightfall, you needed a place to stay or you were dead. And so there was an inn, but they were few and far between. And so we need to remember this when we hear this story, that it's a wilderness story, that there's danger. And the context of it all is like it's extreme danger taking place, because when you understand that there's this danger, like when someone stops to help someone else, it draws out how much more that inconvenient love, all that inconvenient love that existed in this story between the Samaritan and his Jewish foe. The risk is more than just robbers. I mean, literally, you have sheer cliffs, you have robbers, you have predator animals like lions that will eat you because why not? If you're bleeding, you smell delicious and they'll eat you. But you also have dehydration from the heat in the desert. And so if you stop and help this man, you are not only in a bad situation, but you're not putting yourself in very good shape, and you are now exposed to everything that he has succumbed to and is in his state. You're going to expose yourself to that same thing. So if you were a traveler, you would want your travel to be quick and be easy and done before dark. And when you think about that, it helps inform us on how much more compassion that Samaritan man had. His compassionate heart, his inconvenient love for someone who was in desperate need of saving. Despite the risk to himself, he stops. He lengthens his day of travel, runs the risk of nightfall where he more than likely will be put in a situation of life or death. And to top it all off, he uses his own supplies for survival on a stranger. So because he did that, he leaves, and especially a Jewish man. And so he leaves himself as a result more vulnerable to attack, more vulnerable to the wilderness, more vulnerable to death. You didn't have a restocking station. You couldn't just swing by 7-Eleven to get more Band-Aids. What you took on this journey is all you had for survival. And you didn't take much because it's a lot of weight. And so everything he needed for the journey was with him in that moment, and he takes of his own for a stranger. You know what I call that? Love in action. Love in action. He surrendered his own possessions for another. He not only gives up his own supplies, but what else did he give up? His own donkey, pack animal. Travel is brutal. It's physically demanding. It works your thighs and your hamstrings and your glutes. Your legs will be fried by the time you're done. It's physically demanding. So the donkey is there to help you with your travel. Because if you have to carry all your stuff for survival to begin with and not have a donkey, yeah, you're hosed. But he had a donkey. But he gives up that donkey to alleviate the burden of travel for the guy who was hurt. In this moment, he chooses to take on the terrain himself, to take on the difficulties himself so that the other one could have a better situation. I call that love. Surrendering personal comfort for the sake of others. So this story isn't just a good Samaritan story without deep impact. The story isn't just a story. Putting it in its proper place with wilderness, the travel, it shows us how much deeper it is and how much deeper the answer to the question is, who is my neighbor? Because what we see in this story is an inconvenient love for someone that goes beyond just nice words and ideals. We do that all the time. Yeah, I want to love my neighbor. We don't do it. We just say we do. We see an inconvenient love in this story for someone else that goes beyond what is comfortable for us when it comes to doing what? Love in action. And I'm telling you, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for me. I would assume it's a challenge for you. If it's a challenge for me, I would assume it's a challenge for you, right? It's hard to love people. It's a challenge for me, actually, on how I think about what it means to be a neighbor to somebody, what it means to actually love someone else, how I see those that are on the other side of the road. It begs the question, how have I loved? How have I been a neighbor to others? In wilderness experience, in difficulties of life, in physical, mental, emotional situations, how have I been to those people in that situation? Do I dive right in, or do I go, I ain't dealing with that baggage today? How have I loved those I don't agree with? How have I loved those where tensions exist? It's a struggle. And so the question posed this morning is, who do I look like in this story? Who do I most resemble in this story? And I want you to think about that. Who do you most resemble in the story? Because I'm afraid all too often I've passed by on the other side. I don't want to deal with it. I'd love to help, but you know what? It's very inconvenient for me right now. And I've passed by on the other side. Or I've looked the other way and not noticing. And then maybe glance over my shoulder and say, no one else saw, so I guess it's okay. How many times do we do that? See a situation and, well, no one noticed that I didn't stop, or no one noticed that I noticed, so it's okay that I didn't do anything because, you know what? Nobody saw. It's okay that I didn't put the energy, effort, and time into someone else to help render aid to someone else who's going through a tough time because, you know what? Nobody saw. It's okay that I didn't love inconveniently. Nobody saw. So to me, that's something to wrestle with and something for all of us to wrestle with today. Because at the end of the day, we do want to be like the Good Samaritan. Agree? Right? You want to be like a Good Samaritan. So then it begs the question, how do we do that? How can we get there? Well, there's good news. There's some goofy bad news, but there's some good news. But I'm going to give you the bad news first. By yourself, you will never get there. By your own effort, you will never do what the Samaritan did. Why? Because we live in a society and we grew up learning what? Survival of the fittest. Correct? Survival of the fittest. I grew up knowing that. You know what? If I want to make it in this life, I'm going to survive over others. And that's how we operate in the world. So we by ourselves will never get there. But here's the deal. How do we get there? It's not until you understand who you truly are in this story. See, we like to put ourselves in either the Levite or the priest or the Samaritan. That's where we put ourselves in this story. But you know who we are in this story? We're the one left for dead. We're the one that's beaten. We're the one that's robbed. We're the one that's stripped naked, bleeding out, left for dead, crying for help. Every day we know this. We ignore it, but we know it. Because guess what? The world passes by you on the other side. The world promises you this, this, and this, and then when it doesn't achieve it, it says, well, screw off, and it goes this way. The world will always pass by you on the other side because it doesn't care about you. The self-help books, I'll be honest, you know what? They're there for making money. Those self-help books may help you in a time, but eventually they're going to fail you because it's not going to work. And you know what? Those authors don't care. They're going to pass by on the other side. They've already made their money. Those motivational celebrity speakers, they don't care. They're going to pass by on the other side because if their life will get affected by you, they ain't got nothing, no time for that. Everything passes by on the other side when we are in wilderness because it's inconvenient. But I'm telling you today, there is one who will never do that. Jesus Christ will never walk by on the other side because he sees you. He sees you. He sees you. And then he stops. Jesus stops. He reaches down and he tends your wounds. He takes your wounds and says, you know what? I'm gonna take them upon me. And then he what? Cleans you up. He bandages you up. He gives you all that he has. He takes all of his stuff, all of his supplies, and he says, here, I got you. And he takes it. And then what does he do? He picks you up. And he doesn't put you on a donkey because you're more worth it than that. He puts you on himself. And he carries you to safety. He takes you through the demanding danger of all the wilderness so that you could be healed and you could be saved from imminent death. To heal you and make you new again. Jesus, in our life-wrecked, sinful world, in our sinful despair of life, on the side of the road with no help, no hope, took it all on so that we could have something, a life. See, Jesus was stripped, naked. Jesus was beaten. Jesus was left for dead, and then guess what? He died. He was robbed. He did it because that's what love is. That's love in action. That is inconvenient love that knows no bounds and will not stop. It is in this extravagant, inconvenient love of Christ to you that you find the true, unchanging, steadfast love that no one outside of him can ever give you. The love the world promises won't come, but the love of Christ is steadfast. And it is in Jesus that you find that this extravagant character of love in your life actually is given to you as gift from his. And so it is a gift of God. And so when we actually grasp just a glimpse of his love, just an understanding of his love that goes beyond convenience for you in Jesus, when we just get a glimpse of that, the depth and height and the breadth of this love, that's when we finally truly begin to have it seep through us to others, when we actually understand who we are in the story. In the wilderness, there is extravagant love that exists, that goes beyond convenience, that goes beyond your own ability. In the wilderness, there's an extravagant love that goes beyond just you and your convenience for others. What does it mean to love someone else? Even when intentions exist and maybe even hatred, and when you maybe don't want to deal with it. What does it mean to love someone else? It means remembering who you are in the story, who Jesus truly is in the story, and how far he went for you because he sees you and stops. And then when you've been cleaned up, when you have been healed, when you have been made through Jesus' love and his sacrifice for you in the wilderness, when this healing and newness of life takes place through Jesus, it is then that we can finally walk through wilderness, see someone, and stop. See them and stop, and then share that inconvenient love that's been given to you through Jesus, that's been given to those beaten, to stop and share that inconvenient love in the wilderness for those who are crying out for aid. So through Jesus, we are saved, and through Jesus, we serve and love our neighbor in an inconvenient way. Amen? And let's pray.